Hello, and welcome to our webcast, Getting Ahead of the Hybrid Data Curve with DataDirect, presented by Progress. I'm your host, James Goodfellow, and I am a product marketing manager within the Data Connectivity and Integration Group here at Progress. Joining me today is my colleague, Ken Butler. Ken is a product manager here within Data Connectivity and Integration. Hi, Ken. How are you today?
Good afternoon. Doing well.
Good. So today we're going to talk to you about some of the industry trends toward hybrid data and how products like our hybrid data pipeline can help enterprises achieve seamless data access across cloud-based and on-prem applications and data. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know what to expect today from our webinar. I'll kick things off by walking through a couple of slides that describe changes in the industry as well as our new product offering. And then Ken is going to give you a live tour of the product in action. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with your questions. All right, so back to the topic at hand. Stepping back a little bit, data access has certainly changed a lot over the past few decades. We've gone from connecting one machine to another, and then connecting a network of data sources. And then now, of course, we're at this point of near limitless number of both on-prem and cloud-based data sources to which we can connect. Enterprises traditionally have had this limited sphere of systems to connect to. So that's relational databases and data warehouses, et cetera. On-site controlled systems that didn't necessarily require extensive authentication or security measures. And then to meet this need, ISVs and enterprises have traditionally built SQL connectors between these applications and data sources that are ODBC and JDBC driven. And just to make sure that we're all on the same page, here's a little bit of what that common approach looks like. It should look pretty familiar. We have a wide variety of internal data stores that we can access from our preferred BI or analytics tools. And then there are these resources that are generally accessed via ODBC or JDBC connections. And then because they're on site and within the firewall, these connections are fast and they're secure and they're relatively dependable. Now, as we all know, on-prem data is not always the most practical option. More and more data sources and applications have moved into the cloud. Public-private cloud deployments and migrations are expected to grow for the foreseeable future. And in fact, if you look at this chart from a Forbes study from a few years back, it posits that we'll continue to see strong spending growth year over year through at least the next decade in public and private cloud-based infrastructure. And while many services and data sources are shifting to the cloud, that doesn't mean that we can altogether abandon our legacy on-prem applications, but it does mean that we need to find a way to access all of this data, no matter where it's located, with the same speed and expect the same level of security as we do currently with our on-prem data. While this shift to hybrid cloud and hybrid data is generally seen as positive for most enterprises, it isn't without challenges. And here are just a few samples of the challenges that software vendors and enterprises both face. Regardless of where it resides, we need our data to function as if it's all stored in-house and is easy and convenient to access. And we are all still held to the same standards when it comes to the security of our data and the compliance rules we face. In a lot of ways, the concern only deepens as we move to a hybrid model and the data is moved between applications and sources, both within and outside of the firewall. And we need data at the speed of business, really. Cloud storage loses value if our customers and our internal consumers are constantly waiting for it to load. Real-time or near real-time is essential for a lot of the application reporting and decision-making that we do. So for all of these reasons and for more, we have developed a solution to address this challenge. To meet these challenges, we continue to innovate a product that we've had out for a little bit called the Hybrid Data Pipeline. Hybrid Data Pipeline is our self-hostable hybrid connectivity solution that you can run either in the cloud or on-prem. A hybrid data pipeline enables firewall-friendly access to on-prem data sources. It allows you to expose your data source for an open analytics deployment via either SQL or REST. And then it also lets you create a single interface to access any cloud data source. So I want to take a few moments to dive into each of these deployment types. First of all, firewall-friendly access to on-prem data sources. So Hybrid Data Pipeline features a secure hybrid data gateway that lets you access data behind any firewall without using complex network configurations such as SSH tunnels, reverse proxies, or VPNs. Unlike VPN, SSH, and other traditional solutions, our services are engineered for the cloud to include a scalable architecture, access management, security, and data compression. Users can host a hybrid connectivity solution in your own cloud or on premises or in your own DMZ. And then they can get real-time connectivity to the latest big data, relational, and NoSQL data sources. Next up, Hybrid Data Pipeline allows you to expose your data sources for open analytics projects via SQL or REST. This means you can deploy a standard REST data access layer for your database. You can make your data accessible to BI and analytics platforms. You can expose on-prem data behind the firewall to cloud apps across the firewall. And you can attain real-time access to on-prem data on demand, enabling you to keep sensitive data behind your firewall and still be able to comply with strict data privacy laws such as GDPR. And then the final use case here is with Hybrid Data Pipeline, you get a single interface to access any cloud data source. So you can access all SaaS and cloud apps, including Salesforce and Google Analytics, Oracle Sales Cloud, Eloqua, and many more. Access this data through the interface of your choice, whether it's ODBC or JDBC, and then connect one interface to many SaaS APIs, each with their own varying rules for authentication, for query, for metadata, quality of service, et cetera. And then here recently, we've released our 4.6 version of Hybrid Data Pipeline, and this packs even more functionality to help you securely connect with enterprise data really wherever it lives. New features in this version include REST API connectivity. So we've combined the functionality from our Progress DataDirect Autonomous REST Connector product, which we launched at the beginning of this year to enable users to access and query API data using standard SQL. The new version includes multi-tenant user management, which is a set of new features that enable customers to more effectively manage users, data sources, and server settings on a tenant-by-tenant basis, and transaction support. So HTTP 4.6 supports transactions against data stores such as Oracle, DB2, MySQL, Microsoft SQL Server. These transactions are supported for both JDBC and ODBC, plus a lot of just really cool other factors. So what's the bottom line? Hybrid Data Pipeline offers your enterprise fast, secure, and scalable access to cloud and on-prem data in real time. And while I can stand here and talk to slides, I think at this point, it's going to hit home a lot more for you if you get to see it in action. So Ken, at this point, I do want to turn it over to you and to give a live demo. Ken?
Thank you, James. So I am fighting off a little bit of allergies here today. So if you hear me go on mute for a couple of seconds, it's just because I'm trying to be as polite as possible. Okay, so before we get into some of the use cases of Hybrid Data Pipeline, which I'm going to shorten to HDP, I just want to provide just a quick overview of the capabilities found within the UI of HDP before demonstrating some of the three main use cases that James kind of outlined in his presentation. So HDP really has two personas that we're targeting. The first are ISVs that integrate it within their own product portfolio. An example would be a BI tool that developed and hosted in Microsoft Azure that needs to provide their customers with access to on-premises data. And the second would be organizations that are not considered to be ISVs that need to support on-premises to cloud connectivity for a consuming application. An example of this would be enriching Salesforce data with on-prem data using Salesforce Connect in Hybrid Data Pipeline. And so the main UI of Hybrid Data Pipeline, very simple UI, and the main purpose for this is to manage and administer and test users, data sources, and server settings. Hybrid Data Pipeline is cloud agnostic. You can install it in Azure, you can install it on-prem, AWS, and even Google Cloud Platform. And so it really doesn't necessarily matter where it's installed, but for some of these use cases, it does. And so this installation today is installed as a cluster on AWS. And so we do have, James mentioned, multi-tenant support. Now, this isn't physical multi-tenant support, it's logical. And so if you are an ISV, or if you have a need to have multiple tenants, you can assign tenant administrators within your customers to do user and data source provisioning for you They can also set specific settings across the tenant and their users to help alleviate some of the pain it could be for onboarding new users on your side. On the user side, we just have a list of users. Each user is assigned a username, a role, and a status. We do have some default roles that are configured like system administrator, user, tenant administrator, and OData query. But if you want to dive in and set up a new role based upon whatever your use case may be, there's a whole set of permissions that you can assign to each role, whether or not they can access the web UI, whether or not they can either view, modify, or delete data sources. And so there's a whole bunch of different combinations that would be effective based upon your own personal use case. Here we have a set of data sources that have already been configured, but you can easily create new data sources. These are JDBC connections, everything from Salesforce to SQL Server, Sugar CRM to the new autonomous REST connector. If there isn't a data source that you see on this list that you would need to be able to have access to, we also support generic third-party JDBC connectivity. And so you would also be able to kind of bring your own driver to Hybrid Data Pipeline, and it would work out of the box. The great thing about this is that we do have a third-party JDBC validation tool that you can run against the driver, and we can kind of let you know the level of support or compatibility that Hybrid Data Pipeline would have with that specific driver. And we also have a SQL editor. So cloud administrators or system administrators or even your users, if they have access to the UI, would be able to come in here, run a couple of queries against the data source, make sure that everything's configured appropriately, and kind of move on. And so the first example I want to kind of take a look at here is firewall-friendly access to data sources. And we're going to be taking a look at REST connectivity, Oracle, Hadoop using Hive, and also Salesforce here. And so firewall-friendly access to data sources can very easily be described as being able to use on-premises data without poking holes in your firewall or your customer's firewall using our secure on-premises connector. So traditionally, this can be done using VPNs, reverse proxies, or SSH tunnels, which can be costly and difficult to manage or scale out, especially when it comes to the security requirements from your customers' IT departments. So onboarding new customers for your SaaS application can be simplified when using HTTP, and it doesn't require VPN setup. We provide an installer that you can provide to your customers, and they can install it behind their firewall, do all the configurations on their side. And each install is directly associated with a Hybrid Data Pipeline installation. So it would, if your users install it behind their firewall, there's only one HTTP instance that it could possibly connect to, just based upon a couple files that we pack along with the install itself too. And so for our first source, we're going to just take a look at Hadoop. Hadoop, this is a data lake that is behind Progress's firewall. So nobody has access to it, especially nobody within AWS. But since we have the on-premises connector already installed and configured to use this data source, we'd be able to take a look at the data from this from within AWS. So I don't have to go to my IT department to ask them to open up a couple ports within our firewall. I don't have to create a VPN connection. And so to kind of prove to you that this actually does work, we can go to the SQL editor. We can select this. It's going to load up all the schema information within this Hadoop cluster. And so we've got all of our different repositories here. We're going to take a look at this one. Look at the tables. So these are just basic JDBC metadata calls. We're using a standard interface. And we can take a look at subscribe here. And so this is going to make a request to the on-prem connector that's behind Progress's firewall. It's going to communicate with that on-premises connector, grab the data, and send it back to AWS. And you can see the results here. At a minimum, we grab about 200 records before we have to start paging, just for performances reason within the UI. But you can see that we got some data back. And it's as easy as that. The on-premises connector takes a couple minutes to install. You can set it up like I did here to Hive, and then we were able to get our data back here. And you can do the same thing. from a SQL editor as well too. This is just using a JDBC connection to the hybrid data pipeline instance. If I just take a look at the connection details, I'm using a JDBC connection. And the cool thing about this is that the only thing we need to change when we're connecting to all these different data sources that hybrid data pipeline supports is I just need to change the data source ID here. So this connection string can be used across my Oracle example here and also my SpaceX example here. And so when we talk about having a common interface, all these different data sources, this is what it actually means. It's having a common JDBC interface in this instance. So I just cancel this out, run a quick query, show that it works outside of hybrid data pipeline SQL editor as well too. And we get the same data that gets returned back as well. So if we go back to HDP here, a second slide that James showed specific to some of the use cases that we support is something that we kind of call open analytics via SQL or REST. Now, this concept, open analytics, is a common use case that we often see, which enables users of your cloud or on-premises hosted database or application to be empowered to use any BI or analytics tool of their choice. And just kind of like what I was saying a little bit before is that this is because HTTP offers a common interface, whether it's ODBC, JDBC, or REST, to access any data source that we support today. And for this example, I'm actually going to take a look at OData. So hybrid data pipeline supports essentially RESTifying a data source. And we do that through the use of OData. OData is being really heavily pushed by Microsoft, SAP, Adobe, I believe too. And it's basically an ISO approved NOASIS standard that defines a set of best practices for building and consuming RESTful APIs. And so OData helps you focus on your business logic while building RESTful APIs without having to worry about the various approaches to define request and response headers, status codes, HTTP methods, and so on. And so if we just take a look at an example database here, we're going to go back to our Hive instance, and we're going to go to this OData tab. So when you create a new data source, you have to fill in some of the generic information thing here too, like server name, user ID, password, data source name. There are some security options that you may need to set based upon your own use case. And here we have an OData tab. And so this is our OData editor. If we take a look at the actual details of the editor here, this is where we actually go and have you design an API on top of a data source. So you select the schemas or the tables that you want to be RESTified. The columns pop up here specific to the email open table. And within that, we have specific options. You can set, if you have a fairly difficult schema that isn't necessarily very easy to describe, you can set alias names. If you want to just call this ATV ID, you can simplify the outbound alias name that your users would have to leverage. And so we're going to take a look at an OData API that we put on top of Oracle here. This is the metadata document. Every OData API has a metadata document, and that basically describes the entities and entity sets that you have access to within the REST API. And so hybrid data pipeline, we were able to put an OData API on top of Oracle here, and we have access to two different entities, employees and departments. So if I actually just wanted to dive into that a little bit further, I could actually do this just from a web browser. And I get back a bunch of JSON. It's a JSON formatted document. It looks like there's employee numbers, names, hire dates, and salaries. It's a little bit easier to see in Postman. And so I'm just going to run this really here quick. And you can see that the data gets returned right back from hybrid data pipeline. So that Oracle database could easily be on-prem. If you want to have an enterprise data access layer on-prem, being able to be served out to some of your cloud consumers, you could do that using hybrid data pipeline. The nice thing about OData is it really does provide a very standard way to filter data using OData queries or OData syntax. If you look at a lot of how some other REST APIs are implemented, paging, filtering, ordering, and sorting are all different from one API to another. But if you stick with OData, which is a industry standard, you get a very easy way and easy syntax to filter your data. And so if you take a look at this filter, it's just taking a look at employees that have a salary that is less than 3,000, and I get back all the data that I want. And so when we speak about open analytics via SQL or REST, the really cool thing about this is that I can take this URL, my employee entity, go into Tableau. Now, Tableau supports various connectors for JDBC. They have a generic JDBC connector. But the cool thing they have here is an OData connectivity piece here. And so we're pointing to our HTTP AWS instance here, and we're going against that employees table. So I'll just type in my password. Hopefully I've correctly typed it in, and there it is. And so from right within Tableau, we can go to a REST API instance that we set up within Hybrid Data Pipeline, put in that OData URL. Maybe you want to pull in a couple measures and dimensions here. We'll just put employee name up here, salary, and we should come up with a very easy bar chart, just like that. And so open analytics using Hybrid Data Pipeline really empowers your users to use, if you don't have BI or analytics baked within your own platform or within your own SaaS application, they want to be empowered to use their own tool of choice. They may have training, they may have years of experience using Tableau, Power BI, Click, or whatever else may be on the market. But the generic way that we allow you to serve data to your customers or to your users makes this a really easy use case to support. One cool thing that that it's also referenced related to OData is the fact that Salesforce Connect is an OData consumer. So if you have analysts or business users that want to be able to enrich some of their data within Salesforce, Hybrid Data Pipeline can do that using OData. And so if you have a whole bunch of customer financial data that's still stuck on premises, and you don't want to have the cost of storing that within Salesforce, you can actually use Hybrid Data Pipeline to create an OData feed, connect that right up into Salesforce, and you can see these same entity sets that I have with my OData API, departments and employees. And you can get that right within the tabs in Salesforce. And the nice thing about this is Hybrid Data Pipeline isn't just read-only. It's fully CRUD capable. So if I go and I see an error within one of these columns in Salesforce, I can just delete that, hit save, put a little bit of power into my business users, into their hands, and to just show you that that actually did work, we're going to just do a quick SQL query against this Oracle database to show you that outside of Salesforce, it actually did change. And you can see that Dallas town modified to Dallas. So it's the OData API is very powerful, very easy to set up, and fully CRUD capable too. So you can create, read, update, and delete data right within Salesforce. So going back into Hybrid Data Pipeline, we just have a couple more things to take a look at. We're going to take a look at this. So we know that we can bring data into Salesforce by using the OData APIs that HDP can create. We're going to just take a look at the other way. So we can actually connect to Salesforce. We're just going to go here, do a very quick little SQL query, and we can bring data from Salesforce into any other consuming application that you may have. And so it goes both ways, into Salesforce and also out of Salesforce as well too. The last use case I want to take a look at before going into some other various details about Hybrid Data Pipeline. In 4.6, we added the ability to use our autonomous REST connector, which I'm going to call ARC, just to shorten everything up a little bit. And so ARC is a way for us to be able to connect to REST APIs using standard SQL tools. Now, the big thing out there is the number of data sources that are definitely exploding, year in and year out. And not every data source out on the web or in the cloud has a driver that comes with it. If you want to connect to a SpaceX API, or you want to connect to a new marketing automation tool that doesn't have a driver, how are you able to extract out that data without performing any complex ETL and give it into the hands of your customers or your business users? Well, you can do that with Arc. So if I just take a look at a data source I set up right beforehand, I'm going to a single endpoint. And you can see the endpoint here. It's api.spacexdata.com. It's a free API out there. The result of this API is about 10,000 lines of JSON. It's very difficult to understand, and it would be very difficult to parse out and put into relational format. And so what the Autonomous REST connector is actually able to do is, if we look at this in a little bit more of a better format, you can see that the JSON document has very complex types in here. And so what our Autonomous REST connector can do is it can normalize the JSON document into a set of basically virtual relational tables. So any compatible SQL that you query, send out to it, it'll work. And so if you just go into Hybrid Data Pipeline really quick and take a look at this from the SQL editor, I'm going to show you what we're actually able to do. So we're going to take a look at the metadata here. We've got our tables. And so what happened is we had our launches table. We have a table for rockets. So you can kind of see how these get normalized out. We have ships, cores, launches, and links. And so you can see all these tables here. And so the great thing about this is that if I'm going through any type of modernization effort in my enterprise, or I'm moving to a cloud-hosted solution that used to provide me straight ODBC or JDBC connectivity, and now they're moving to a REST API, you will have the ability to seamlessly transition to these new systems. So I'm just going to grab a quick SQL query here to show you that you can kind of really throw any type of SQL out this. So essentially what we're doing here is we're trying to find our top paying customers by payload size, and we're going to sort that data. So we're doing a join across two of these tables, and then we're going to do a group by and then an order. Hopefully everything works here. Looks like it did. And our top paying customer looks like it's Iridium Communications. And just the magic in that is great, because having to do something like that by being able to normalize out all this data yourself through some type of ETL process would be incredibly difficult. But now that Hybrid Data Pipeline supports the Autonomous REST connector, it makes it really easy for your users or for your customers as well too. And the great thing is that out of the box, it can read almost any REST API. There's a couple of caveats to it. We don't support XML-based APIs and a few, homegrown type authentication methods out there, but we do support basic authentication, header, token-based, and OAuth 2 as well too. And so just one more quick note about Hybrid Data Pipeline before I kind of turn it over to James for some Q&A. We do have customers that are both ISVs and customers that aren't specifically in the field of developing software. And so if you don't want to provide your users access to the API, or you don't want your users to be able to view this if you're going to be integrating this within your own platform suite, we do have a set of both API and management APIs so that you have seamless integration from HTTP, whatever you want to do in the UI, you can also do within the APIs. There's actually a couple more features in the APIs than there is in the UI right now, but we do have a lot of customers that actually create their own type of Hybrid Data Pipeline portal using their own branding and theming, and they leverage the administrative and the management APIs to do that as well too. So we covered about maybe 4 or 5 different use cases there, kind of went through a whole breadth of activities from enriching data into Salesforce, pulling data from Salesforce, connecting to a Hadoop cluster that's behind the Progress firewall, and also leveraging the Autonomous REST connector. So I hope you're able to get a very wide view of HTTP, but also a brief glimpse into it as well too. James?
Thank you, Ken. I appreciate that. That was a great presentation. We had a few questions come in, and we'll take those now. So, Ken, let me start with this one. Is there a limit to the number of endpoints, so on-prem or cloud endpoints that can be connected to?
Data sources or endpoints?
Well, either, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, there's no limit to the number of data sources that you can connect to. If you have a multi-tenant logical architecture like we support, you could have, hundreds of customers, and each of those customers could have hundreds of connections as well too. There really is no limit.
Okay. One of our OpenEdge customers has asked about, so they have an OpenEdge on-prem database and an Azure data lake. So can they be integrated via HTTP?
HTTP doesn't necessarily perform the data movement. It enables data access. And so we would be able to access the on-prem data. So Microsoft Azure has a data integration tool called Data Factory. Data Factory, I believe, supports ODBC connectivity. So likely there would be a way to bring that data using Data Factory from the on-prem OpenEdge instance to the data lake in Azure.
Okay.
Just to be clear, Hybrid Data Pipeline is not a data integration tool. It can enable different data integration scenarios by providing that type of connectivity across ground to cloud and cloud to cloud.
And that's the sort of misnomer between integrate and connectivity or access, right? It's enabling access, or it's powering access and connectivity to enable different ETL or integration tools.
Right. I mean, if you take a look at most of the DI tools, the data integration tools on the market today, they're usually generating some type of SQL in the back end that's using either ODBC or JDBC connectivity. And so if you have Hybrid Data Pipeline set up on Azure and you need to perform some type of ETL job, the only thing you need to do is set up a new JDBC connection to the Hybrid Data Pipeline. And the readers or the syncs within the DI tool would be able to read from that using that JDBC connection to HTTP.
Okay. Is there a limit to, let's see, how much data can it fetch? Is there a size limit? And then how does that affect, how does it scale from there?
That's a tough question. We do have a couple of limits that can be set based upon how big of a query can be sent to the server and how much of that request will be sent back to the client. There are some throttling capabilities so that one user won't hog up all the resources of the entire system and kind of bleed dry the system and not allow other people to take advantage of what's out there. And so there are some performance tuning capabilities that we have. There really is no limit how much data we could actually pull through. We do have some customers that make some giant requests that are, multiple gigabytes big. And we do our own performance testing to determine, how many threads should you be running, how many nodes should you be running based upon the number of users and the volume of data that you expect to use through Hybrid Data Pipeline. So the answer, I guess, the short answer would be yes, we support limits and throttling of request sizes, but also it depends on your use case, like everything else when it comes to sizing.
Okay. Does Hybrid Data Pipeline bypass our firewall?
No. The on-premises connector, which is our agent that runs behind the firewall, does not require any ports to be opened up. And so requests are sent to it. Actually, it makes a request out to the hosted Hybrid Data Pipeline to see if there are any requests that it needs to fulfill. And if there are, it will go get the data and return it back to the Hybrid Data Pipeline server. But no, there's no reason to open up ports in your firewall or ask your IT administrator to do anything other than install it for you near your data cluster.
Okay. And then what about homegrown databases or data sources or applications? Is there's, as long as connectivity is not going to be an issue there, right?
I mean, any application or platform would be able to take advantage of what Hybrid Data Pipeline offers if they support ODBC, JDBC, or REST APIs. So as long as you have the ability to leverage one of those three interfaces, you would be able to support HTTP or use it.
Got it. And then what are the benefits of using HDP as we connect, say, a Progress database to Power BI using ODBC?
I'm thinking through that one. I mean, I guess it depends upon where that Progress OpenEdge database is actually hosted. Unclear with the details of the question.
Yeah, it's okay. You know what we can do is we can put a response together and send out to the folks who asked that question. And then one last question: what about ABL? Is the ABL language, is that supported by Hybrid Data Pipeline?
No.
No. So it's SQL based. It's okay. So for the folks who asked those questions, thank you. And then if you asked a question about the Power BI, if you want to email us with some additional details, we will be happy to provide them. And actually, we can just reach out to you directly. All right, Ken, I know that you don't feel well, and I appreciate you jumping in on this today all the same. So thank you. For Ken and myself, as well as everyone here at Progress, I would like to say thanks for joining us today. I hope you took a lot away from this. If you have any follow-up questions or just you want to learn more about DataDirect or Progress products or the Hybrid Data Pipeline or Autonomous REST Connector or any of the things we talked about today, please visit progress.com. You can also reach out to either Ken or myself directly through the website, and we would be happy to talk with you. Thank you all, and have a great day.